So, welcome everyone to our monthly speaker series hosted by the Inclusive Gifted Education Center. Today, we will record this session and post a recording on the PIER website, which is Hawaii or hi-peer.org. I'm going to put the link to the website in the chat as well for everyone. Again, if you're not comfortable being recorded, you can turn off your video and or rename yourself, and we'll give you guys a few minutes to do so. After today's presentation, we have a question and answer session. You can type your question in the chat box or raise your hand during the Q&A session to ask your question. After the Q&A, we will have some final announcements. So to begin, our center is housed within the Specific Inclusive Education Research and Resource Center, or PIER for short. PIER is managed by faculty and staff at the Center on Disability Studies located on the University of Hawaii at Manoa campus. The overarching goal of our center is to nurture untapped talents through inclusive practices. To reach this goal, we host monthly speaker series as well as in-person symposiums that focus on building awareness on neurodiversity and choice exceptionality. Our speaker series and symposiums are made possible through funding from the U.S. Department of Education, Jacob K. Javits Gifted and Talented Education Program grant. Each month of our speaker series will focus on different topics and perspectives from well-known speakers in the areas of inclusion, neurodiversity, and education. And today I'm happy to introduce our speakers, Philip Davey and Leanne De La Vega. My apologies. Our session today will contains our panel of STEM faculty and researchers who have mentored university students with disabilities. They will share insights, challenges, and effective strategies to foster inclusive and supportive learning environments. So please welcome our panelists. And to begin, I want to start by asking our STEM faculty and researchers to introduce themselves, tell us your name, where you're from, and a little bit about yourself.
Okay, all right, I'll start. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Philip Davey. I'm originally from Scotland, but I of course now live here in Hawaii. I have had a background in science. I'm a PhD in bioengineering, which I got here at the University of Manoa. And I've used that in various work. So I've worked in the UK, here in Hawaii, and in Japan. And in the course of that work, this is in biotech and pharma area, I have been doing contracts and developing business relationships across the Pacific region, Europe, United States, and East Asia. So I spent a lot of time on communication and building relationships, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So specifically, I'm going to be leaning into some of the experiences I had working as a grad student and a postdoc here at UH, working with mentoring students with different needs, some of whom had disclosed disabilities, some didn't. So thank you all for joining today. Look forward to the discussion.
Aloha everyone. My name is Leanne De La Vega. I'm the Undergraduate Research Experiences Coordinator and the Tapped into STEM Campus Lead at Kapi'olani Community College. I was born and raised in town. I've moved several times within town. I'm basically like a super townie. But my parents are from the Philippines and from Japan. I identify as somebody with what I like to call like an alphabet soup of disabilities. So, I've worked basically, I have kind of like a long kind of a I would like to call it adjacency to STEM. So when I was in high school, I did like high school robotics, and then I entered into college doing computer science, and then I became a failed STEM student, and I got my master's degree in English. But then I got some after teaching as an adjunct for a little bit. I worked as a kind of basically a Native Hawaiian engineering grant coordinator for several years before running the research program here at Kapi'olani.
Thank you both for sharing a little bit about yourselves. So the first question I want to ask is what motivated you to mentor students with disabilities in STEM fields?
Leanne, please.
Okay. Well, I think my answer is a little obvious from my introduction, but you know, I am someone who has disabilities, and so I think one of my teaching philosophies or personal philosophies is to be able to provide the support that one had been successful for me, but also the support that I wish I had when I was a student, especially when I was a student in STEM. So really, that's my main motivator for being an advocate for students with disabilities in STEM fields.
Okay. Yeah, I think we share some history there because I've known people with various disabilities my entire life. I wasn't actually really aware of what a disability was. I was just kind of accepting different people have different talents and different challenges. Um, but come to realize that a little bit later. First experience mentoring students with disability was in high school, assisting a volunteer program for kids who had dyslexia. Um, but that really came into focus coming to UH and getting to work with students here, seeing some of the challenges they had get through programs, and seeing how much that can be on top of the challenges that all students have getting through their degree programs anyway.
Thank you both for sharing. I do want to ask a follow question. You mentioned, Leanne, about success stories. Do you have any success stories of a student with a disability who you mentored that you would like to share?
Yeah, so actually, there's a lot of success stories, and some of them are really big and some of them are really small. So, for example, it could be getting a student to just register themselves at our, DSSO office, or it could be for them to, you know, feel more confident in themselves. So one of the stories I have is that we have a student who is a veteran, and he's been very hesitant in disclosing or really even talking about his disability in our little student group. But through the program, he's become really, really open, and now he's like really interested in doing his future career work, helping people doing assistive technologies. But I think my biggest success story is we had a student a long time ago. I actually didn't know he had disabilities at the time, but he was working on one of our engineering projects, and he, had difficulties. Like showing up to meetings on time and just generally being what a lot of people would consider to be like a flaky student and those kind of things, and then he kind of dropped out of school, and he worked in like different industries, and he came back though a few years ago, and we started talking, and he's really flourished. Like this time he's acing all of his classes, and the key difference was really that he became more confident in who he was as a person and really was able to articulate and advocate for like what his needs are. So for him, he really likes to have hands-on learning opportunities and being able to like talk story with his professors and really engage in the material. And that's been really a huge factor in his success now. And he's doing lots of research projects. He's like presented on conferences. He's really interested in doing neuroscience to help people with disabilities like him. So I think, it's really limitless, like what our students can do with the right support.
Yeah. Philip, you have anything to add to that?
Sure. Um, the one that actually jumped into my mind is a very short-term thing because this was Disability Mentoring Day a few years back now. I had a non-traditional student come in who had expressed an interest in lab work, and so they were partnered up with me. But it became obvious pretty fast that actually they weren't that interested in lab work. This is someone who had finished high school but hadn't had a chance to go through college because they'd had to take on work. And were now at a point where they were looking for other options and looking to change their career path. And it was quite clear that pipetting things and the abstract nature of some of the bench work just wasn't working. But fortunately, we were just across the building from the anatomy lab. I was able to take her over to meet the ME there, who did a variety of things like pulling out buckets full of organs and showing them off and explaining things, which some people would not, enjoy. But this student really lit up. They started expressing themselves. They shared that actually what they were interested in was phlebotomy. And it was nice to find out a couple of years later, they'd gone through the training program, got certified, working as a phlebotomist. So it's always positive to hear that kind of feedback. And it's a good learning lesson in mentoring too, like paying attention, making sure they're actually interested in what you're sharing them.
And actually, Leanne, Philip, and I did get a chance to talk a little bit yesterday, and we were talking about we don't always get to see sometimes or know the successes, right? Like what happens. So, mentoring sometimes can be something that you never know how far your help went, right? So, yeah. But it's cool that you guys got to find and hear about some success stories and maybe help keep you motivated to keep going, right? And keep helping more students. So, yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. So to follow up on that, what challenges have you encountered while mentoring students with disabilities, and what are some ways that you address those challenges?
Yeah, that was a common one that crops up, right? So the area I was working in was molecular biology, which means a lot of bench work, a lot of following protocols, running through different tests, and also trying to figure out why things like that don't work and how to resolve those challenges, which can often mean leaning on your colleagues and other people to get feedback and borrow on their expertise to resolve problems. So we had a student in the lab for about 2.5 years. Intellectually, no challenge with the work, perfectly capable of doing it. No issues there. But when it came to working with other people and getting correct social signals from others, that could be a significant issue. And unfortunately, it led to one of their peers and them having some serious interpersonal communication problems to the point where they couldn't really work in the same space anymore. And we were able to somewhat resolve that with some support from Kokua, but and advocacy and getting them to sit down and have calm discussion. But those kind of challenges have arisen in other circumstances where there's not necessarily been a disability disclosed in that case, but you can see where social challenges have been part of the problem.
Yeah, I guess for me, I think the number one problem with the students that I've been working over, the past couple years has been um, really shame, I think. There's a lot of shame and stigma associated with their disability. Oftentimes, there's also shame and stigma associated with maybe past experiences they had with faculty in STEM. Like, for example, there's a lot of students who, talk about, some math teacher that they had that really made them feel like they were stupid, or, I mean, not all math faculty, obviously, I mean, just in that particular instance. Math faculty are wonderful. So for me, I think it's a lot of times really working on one kind of exploring and working through that initial feeling of shame so that they can advocate for themselves. The other part of that that's connected to that is giving them the language um, to advocate for themselves. A lot of times their students don't really know how to verbalize their needs. And I think that's super important to their success in both academic and in career pathways. So it's also kind of helping them learn how to say, like, maybe, like, my strength is to do like these sorts of tasks, like Philip was saying. Maybe my strength is not necessarily in social kind of situations, but I'm really excellent at analyzing this data or doing like the programming tasks for this project. Or for faculty, it's being cognizant of, or I'm sorry, working with faculty in courses. It's being cognizant that maybe you have issues with like time management and getting certain kinds of like assignments completed. And so if you know that, right, and you have the language to say that, then we can look for tools and support services, or maybe talk to the faculty to see if there's any kind of alternative pathway for that student to succeed in class that's still equitable with, how other students are doing in the class too. So I think that's really the biggest challenge because it's really the first step in kind of getting themselves to set themselves up for success and understanding that a lot of it is creating an environment that works for them, that they can thrive, and that that is possible and that they're allowed to do that. Um,
Sorry, Philip, did you want to add something to that? You're muted. I can see you speaking.
Oops. Sorry about that, Joey.
Okay.
Go ahead
Yep.
again, please.
Oh no, I just saw that you were talking, but your mic was muted, so I wasn't sure if you wanted to add something to what Leanne was saying.
Yeah, I was going to actually add that self-advocacy is a really big part of this challenge. And no matter what the disability in question, being able to express that and being able to clearly communicate needs, especially when there is a significant power imbalance between mentors and mentees, is something you have to keep in mind at all times.
Yeah, and I just want to add, like, it's important to also be able to do that without feeling like you have to disclose your disability too. So framing it, I mean, just as people without disabilities often express preferences or their own strengths or weaknesses in their work capabilities. I mean, it's the same for people with disabilities too. And that's something that's also really been difficult, I think, with working with students with disabilities and myself too, is that just understanding that like overcoming this idea that like you're being a burden because like you want to ask for help or if that you need support services because oftentimes a lot of the challenges that our students have are pretty similar to the challenges that most of our students have in STEM, right? It's like not knowing how to communicate with your professor. It's not being able to work successfully in group projects, right? It's not being able to be successful in your courses because it's really demanding and trying to juggle and learn how to manage your time and your resources, right? So it's just also normalizing, I think, the need for support.
Oh. So actually, this kind of leads me to our next question. You mentioned having assistive technologies or tools to assist students. And I know, the range of disabilities is very large, right? I mean, it's not just one tool that can fix everything or help everyone. But are there assistive technologies or adaptive tools that you have found most useful for students with disabilities in STEM fields? Or is there even a tool that is most effective or helpful?
I'm going to go back to what I promised, which is to lean heavily on communication. Because I think it's normal for mentors to, whatever process they went through, to expect their students to go through the same process. And if that means that the communication style that they used or the communication methods that they used are the ones that they still rely on, they might not be as willing or as open to try something different. So, for example, if a student has some anxiety issues with communicating in person, especially face to face in an office setting or something, giving them the option of sharing updates or communicating their issues or trying to self-advocate through written means, for example, it'd be a big benefit to them. But there is definitely not a single universal tool out there. It has to be adaptable to whatever the situation and need is.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Philip said, and to kind of add on to that, I think there are a lot of tools that can be helpful, right? And so instead of thinking about like one silver bullet universal tool that can help students with not just a wide variety of disabilities, but also a wide variety of like backgrounds and lived experiences, is to kind of do what like the toolbox method, which is to introduce over time lots of different kinds of tools and strategies. So I will say though that one tool that seems to help a lot of our students right now, which I understand is going to be super controversial for me to say here, but is AI. So for example, in a lot of our meetings with students or workshops, or even some of the courses that I teach, some of our students have gotten, like if they're online or hybrid, they have like these assistive note AI note assistive note taking like services that enter the room. I'm sure you've all seen them. That has been tremendously helpful, not only for the student, but actually for all of us in the meeting, even myself, to have kind of this nice automatic way for someone to take notes. Obviously, the students can still take notes, and it's sort of in addition, but it's nice to have an external framework to start off from, or to work from, or to even learn from. The other kinds of ways that we've been teaching our students to use AI is also one, you do need to teach students how to use AI and doing prompt engineering, and also like how to use AI ethically in academics, right? So, for example, we've been kind of introducing this idea for students to use AI tools like ChatGPT, for example, to do things like brainstorming for assignments or for research projects, right? So it's not you're putting in your assignment and expecting it to produce it for you, doing the work for you, because our students do want to do the work, right? But rather sometimes they're very anxious, or they have a lot of really great ideas and it's sort of all over the place, but they have a really hard time kind of narrowing things down or putting things into like a very clear linear structure, which is what we need, especially in science, right? So what they'll do is they'll put in a lots of different kinds of ideas that they have or things that they're reading, and then kind of through different prompts, right, ask it to sort of kind of help them narrow down. And they have like a dialogue with their ChatGPT. Also, some of our students use it to practice conversations that they need to have with their fellow students or with faculty. So, for example, I had a student who, missed class for a few weeks because of their chronic illness or whatever. And she was super nervous to talk to the student, the professor, and she felt like she was like a failure. And so we kind of obviously we also do those things, right? But at home she wanted to practice, and so she used AI to kind of imagine that the AI was a professor and that she could kind of practice talking to them so that she felt a little bit more prepared. So it's really good for people who might need like a lot of structure, or external structure or practice, or those kind of things. So I'm sure there's a lot of other ways that we can use AI, but those are just some of the ways I've seen our students use it.
I'm gonna riff off that and add a little, which is I feel like I should take back my universal tool comment there, because AI can be used for so many different things. And I think it's understandable that in trying to teach, and especially for graduate students trying to teach critical reasoning skills, there is concern about relying on AI as a sort of crutch to resolve problems. But it also helps with structuring thought. It can help resolving issue of getting over a first hump of understanding something. And frankly, learning how to tell the difference between a hallucination and a useful answer from AI does require critical reasoning skills. So I should hope that it also sort of helps develop it a lot at the same time.
Totally. Yeah, and I will say that definitely part of that conversation is also understanding, right, that AI alone cannot do these things. You still need human oversight, right? And you are leveraging some of the tasks that maybe you might struggle with, especially early on. So I come from like a writing composition teaching background, and so for me, right, like a lot of the things that I do, my philosophy is that, things are an iterative process. And so, for me, using AI as a generative tool to help brainstorm or, kind of the early stages things or maybe some refinement are fine. But to emphasize to students that you still need to learn how to do all of these things, right? Like in terms of writing, for example, you still need to be able to think critically, be able to read, academic articles and journals. You still need to be able to understand and break down, the methods of the section, right? You need to be able to understand these things so that when you use AI, you're using them in the best way possible, while still practicing and executing your critical thinking skills and experience, because that's what we have as human beings, right? So, yeah.
I'm going to add on something we discussed again. Sorry, Jarek, I keep interrupting you before you come back in. But No, I think we're giving some broad examples here, but I think it's helpful to think about specifics too. So I will share one from lab experience, which is uh, a lot of the work done, especially in biotech and in biochemistry related areas, requires fine motor skills and requires the ability to do certain physical tasks in a very specific way and be able to order and structure that. So there's a variety of different areas there, the physical components, the mental structuring, the reporting and recording, and doing everything in a consistent or an ordered fashion, which people of different abilities may have challenges with. So as we were saying before, this is really a case of making sure you engage with each and every one of the students that you're mentoring and understanding what their specific challenges. So if they're not doing something right, it might not be that they're not getting it. It might be that they can't get it or they can't do that specific thing. So if it's something like pipetting, if any of you have any experience with that in biology setting, that requires a certain set of fine motor skills that you have to develop and use. But if you can't do it, then you're going to have to look into motorized versions, into machines that can automate some of that process. And obviously that can lead to challenges because it's going to require additional investment on your part. But all of those things can be used by other students too. If you have some sort of automated machine for doing fluid disposition, then other students are going to be able to use that as well. So you're just going to be adding a new tool into your toolbox.
Yeah, I really like that analogy of the tools in your toolbox, right? Like every time you learn about something different, you can add it to your toolbox. And, later on when someone has an issue, you're like, hey, I got a tool for that, or I can help you. Uh, Throw a quick plug out for universal design. So there you go. I think that is super awesome, finding tools that can help everybody or be useful to everyone. So yeah, really, really good ideas, and really good suggestions there. So, okay. So knowing all these different ways to help students and these different issues, are there changes you would like to see in STEM education and research to make it more inclusive for students with disabilities? Is it maybe, seeing more tech things being offered and maybe teaching about how to use them ethically, it sounded like with AI especially. So any changes you guys think would be good to see?
Yeah, okay, I'll lean back on a mentor of my own here, which is ironically, I think the teacher I had in school who was most influential on my science thinking was my history teacher, not one of my science teachers, because they taught critical reasoning skills. And yes, so being able to utilize some of the tech tools, especially in the way Leanne was describing, but also teaching the appropriate use of that is very important. And realistically, this is something that's going to apply to all students. But hopefully this expansion of the tool set is also going to be supportive of students with different disabilities.
Yeah, kind of jumping off what both of you said. Yeah, definitely, right? Universal design learning principles are really valuable. I think though, right, we can say I think a lot of the things we kind of know or probably assume, right, are good practices for this, but I think one that maybe is not practiced enough is maybe including students with disabilities in some of that research or in your education pedagogy building to get their feedback, for example, on some of your courses. I know we'll kind of talk a little bit more about like what advice do we have for mentors and things like that, but that's really a big one. So I did ask in one of our sessions with the students, like what kinds of things would they like to see, change in sort of STEM education. And one of them was this idea, this culture of in exclusivity, right? Like the fact that we have weeder courses, we have this idea that, only the best shall rise up to the top through these rigorous processes and these difficult things. I mean, even thinking things like not necessarily STEM, but like medical school, right? These are rigorous processes that are very daunting and can feel very you know, very othering for these students who are very capable of doing this work, but just need to know that they belong there to start off with. And so a lot of students do report feeling that from either professors or just the kind of the general, as the kids say, vibe of STEM, right? Um, I think though also thinking more carefully about like how are you structuring your courses. So some of the things that some of the students said is you know, I'm trying to keep this away from like just the mentoring, but things like um being really maybe reflective of why if you have like a no technology policy, right? Really thinking about why is that and are there alternative ways to address your concerns about those kinds of things so that students can use technology or even assistive technology in their courses. Or if it's maybe making the spaces more inclusive too. So, for example, we're trying to redesign our STEM center. And so a lot of that was, again, getting from feedback from the students, right? Trying to create like quiet spaces for students who can't handle the external like the stimulus of the STEM center with all the talking and we have like events and things like that. So, I think it's really about understanding that there's multiple ways to get to where you ended up being, kind of like how Philip said, right? So it's maybe reflecting on how you're structuring your courses, how we're structuring our programs and our labs to really think about why is it that we're doing things and are there ways that we can make it more accessible for students?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm going to take it a step forward there and cite a workplace example. So one of the companies I worked for is in a innovation center, which is in a very specific area of research for nanotechnology. But they have a variety of different people with different backgrounds working there. And obviously, this is a privately funded center. It's under a lot of pressure always. So it's not a relaxed environment. And they put some thought and consideration into when they made that building, enabling different spaces. So they have work areas which are very plain, very open, but with very minimal distractions and a set of rules that you need to be quiet and not being disruptive of others in that space. But they also have a common area which is set up with desks and power sockets and everything else that might be needed so that those who are more comfortable in the more open, noisy environment with a lot more color and distraction can work there too. And this is kind of going back on what Jared was saying about principles of universal design. It's not about making it all the same. It's about creating an environment where there's different options for people with different needs.
That's really good, great advice. And actually, you guys kind of answered my next question, which is about if there's anybody here who's listening, or if there's other faculty member who want to become better mentors for students with disabilities. What advice would you give them? What's maybe like a golden rule to live by?
There's a strong tendency, I think, understandably, to be if I can do it, you can do it. But just because you are able to do it a certain way doesn't mean all your students will be able to too. So maybe the golden rule should be keep an open mind and listen.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I think maybe one thing that I see a lot of, even with the most well-meaning people, is this idea that you need to know what the student's disability is in order to best help them. And I think that's kind of difficult for several reasons, right? Some of them are obvious, like maybe the student doesn't have to disclose their disability to you, and shouldn't have to disclose their disability to you, but also like, what does it mean to even know what a disability is, right? You might be working off of stereotypes, for example, and every disability, for example, like ADHD, right? ADHD has a common subset of qualities, but it really depends on you, who you are as a person, what your background is, all of those kinds of things, and it manifests differently in people. So, I think this idea that you need to diagnose or that you need to know specifically what that disability is, as opposed to really thinking about universal design learning and offering different modes of learning, different pathways to get to the same place, is really crucial in making sure that you are reflective of your practices and really thinking about what does mentorship mean. So I think that's like the first big one.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. I was going to add, we kind of touched on this a little bit with AI discussion, but in the educational setting, I know this gets pushed hard, but it still is not widely adopted, which is providing information through different modes. So, for example, a lot of people love to learn through watching a video. Personally, I hate it. I find it very difficult to follow. It's not my preferred style. But it is a burden for faculty members, or it can be a burden to be creating all of the information you want to be teaching in different mediums and sharing that and doing it all at the same time consistently. But we are starting to get access to tech tools that can help make that easier, right? So you can do automated video generation through AI. For teaching purposes, we can now start to be using these tools to enable the information to be more accessible to a wider variety of people. So I think part of it is also, learning new tricks.
Yeah.
We have to not just rely on the means by which we were taught.
Totally. And to kind of go off of that too is also understanding that like doing these kinds of things or offering your lessons or assignments in different modes or whatever is really just good teaching practices. It's not really just about disability, right? Like a lot of our students, right, like Philip said, right, they love the videos, but a lot of our students are like, I can't fast forward the video fast enough. Please give me the text. I'd rather have that. And so, a lot of, like, for example, a lot of tech companies and like Google, when they do those, right, those Coursera courses that I just took, right, they offer both. They offer video, they offer a transcript that highlights, exactly what you're saying when you're saying it, right? And those are all generated by some of the tools that Philip is mentioning. I know that it seems like it's a burden to have to do these extra things, but it's tremendously helpful. So a lot of the things that students have said when we discussed this last week was also small things though that don't rely on just tremendous changes to your very way of teaching or your curriculum, but rather things like maybe on the first day introduce yourself and talk a little bit about yourself, build that like friendly persona so that students feel a little bit more comfortable with you. That can help aid a lot of, especially like anxiety issues and things like that. Other things were like, be really sincere. So, for example, at the end of class, when you're asking, like, does anyone have any questions? And if you're saying it in a way that sounds like, okay, well, hurry up, I got to go to my next class or my next meeting, students are not going to ask you questions, right? Because they can sense it. So that was a big thing, being sincere, and really sharing who you are as a person. But even some other things too. I think a lot of it is just being human. So, for example, we have a student who was taking like a calculus course, and she said what she really appreciated from her professor was when he was doing the things on the, teaching a particular lesson, he would stop and say, you know what, like I actually like made a mistake here, or this concept was really hard for me to learn, and I still make mistakes sometimes, and that kind of put like a tremendous load off of her, feeling like, that she was stupid because she didn't get these things or whatever. To see that someone so smart and so established, right, and who's got a PhD in mathematics, right, is still having problems in, with something in Calc 4, right, is really was really just relatable for her. And she was able to kind of get to know that professor a little bit more and build a better relationship. Also things like even like office hours, right? I know that was like a thing from the other panel. Office hours are super weird. And, one of the most things that you can do to make it more exclusive is to have set office hours, which I know most of us have, right? But some people still have like by appointment only. That is super a huge barrier for people. It's really nice to know that there are set times that you're available that they can just drop in. Also, even explaining what office hours are for and the different ways that you can use it, so that students can receive help and not feel like they have to come with a problem or they have to do, for example, one student said that was really revolutionary for him was just understanding that they could go to office hours just to talk story with the professor, to ask questions that are not necessarily related to like doing better on the tests, but they wanted to know more about the topic. And it kind of led to talking about like research opportunities. And then they started working on a research project together, right? And so just I think small things are also very valuable in making sure that we're more accessible to our students, because at the end of the day, teaching is really a performance. And I think that's important to understand.
You just triggered a memory for me there, which is the first school I went to after high school. It was one that had been around a while, so it valued tradition, which meant that there were a variety of different teaching technologies employed. We had a chemistry professor who still liked to use a combination of a chalkboard and acetate film. And I think it was like the end of the second week coming into that semester, we came into the classroom and there's this giant red balloon tied to one end of the bench. And this was in a chemistry building. So, this was also still old enough that it was plumbed in gas lines and Bunsen burners and things on the bench. And it just stayed there. And it was there for like 3 weeks. And of course, everyone was wanting to know what this red balloon was, but the professor wouldn't answer the question. And then I think about a month in, halfway through the lesson one day, just about the time everyone's starting to lose attention, they lit a taper off the Bunsen burner, and it was a red balloon was full of hydrogen. So when they lit that up, the whole room shook with this boom. And he's like, "Oh, you're awake now. Good." Which, of course, for some people, maybe that's good and that's fun. It's engaging and entertaining. But for some, that was anxiety inducing and a little bit concerning, especially as we had somebody with personal security also in another lecture room in that building who showed up when they heard the giant bang. But yeah, it's a good example of, rather than changing the tools and the approach that they were using, they tried to make a disruption into their own teaching in order to get the attention. So change is good, but not all change. It does have to be taken with some consideration.
I'm sure that lesson was unforgettable.
Oh,
I'm
yes.
sure all of them will remember it for many, many years. Yeah. The interesting thing about just making other things accessible, I recently, like 1 hour ago, had a meeting with somebody else in this telling me there's AI technology to make videos based on just like information that you just plug in. Like so it is possible nowadays to make things very accessible. Yeah. If you guys are interested, you can probably look up our lessons that we're going to write on it later on in the future. By all means, come contact us. Tell everybody about our projects. But thank you both for answering a lot of the questions I had and curiosities about mentoring. I do want to open up the floor to anybody in the audience who wants to ask a question. If you guys have any uh, burning questions that you want to ask, by all means, now is the time. You can either unmute yourself, or if you type it up in the chat, I can read it out loud. So I'll give you a few minutes to ask some questions. If there's no questions, we'll just wrap it up.
I have a question if people can hear me.
We can hear you.
So I work with high school students with disabilities. I also have a daughter with a disability, and she's a high school student. Her disability is, you can see it in a New York moment. She has Down syndrome. However, um, she is learning her third language. She's always been in regular classes. she's a two-time spelling bee champion with no accommodations. Um, it is our hope that she will attend UH someday. But earlier, you had mentioned some of the challenges being social. And that's why I attended today, first of all, to get to know all of you better, because, like I said, it's our hope that she'll go to UH someday. Um, Academically, she's holding her own. She's great. I know this isn't related to STEM per se, but in terms of mentoring, what is your advice for a student being accepted socially and not just put into a group of people, other people with disabilities? Because we have raised our daughter as someone who should be with everybody, not just kind of place, oh, you're over here because you have a disability, but to be right in the thick of it. Sorry for that. That was a long way of asking my
Mhm.
question.
No, no, the pre-context was very helpful. So thank you for sharing.
Leanne, would you like to add something?
You can go first.
Okay.
I'm still thinking.
Okay. Uh, well, yeah, thank you for sharing and thank you for asking the question. She's obviously doing really well. Just out without any context in there, she's obviously doing really well. So, yeah, I can understand your concern. I mean, in any peer environment, there is obviously some risk of exclusion. And especially if there are systems in place that emphasize that, like separation of teaching, being physically put in a different space or being in a situation where their additional needs are disclosed as part of the group. So hopefully what you will find is that there is a lot more of an inclusive style already in place, that whatever additional needs are supplemental and are not really forced into the existing environment, and that if she's comfortable already communicating with her peers and being part of that group, I would hope to see that they don't exclude her because of that.
I don't think I have a very good answer for this. But I think for me personally, right? A lot of it was this is very different, but I guess I would say that I learned how to interact with people more normally, I will say, by watching other people and doing a lot of like mimicking and stuff like that. That might obviously doesn't work for your daughter. But to be honest, I really think that, your daughter seems very exceptional and amazing. And this is maybe not something that she herself can work on, but really this is why we need this panel, is to really make sure that we're understanding of different communication styles and differences, and to also be able to mediate some of those issues if they come up in our classrooms or in our research teams or things like that. Um, yeah, because I think she's probably doing, I mean, you've clearly raised her to be, really, really amazing and doing all of these different kinds of things in all these social settings. And so I really think it's more about educating other people about the different ways to interact with people, because we all have different communication styles. So yeah, I'm sorry, that's probably not very helpful.
No, it's both your answers have been really helpful. We live in Manoa. Our home is in Manoa. Um, it's heartening for us as parents, that she'll be close by. But what Philip said, is lovely. That UH does promote inclusion. We've kind of known that, but it's really good to hear, especially during these interesting times. And Leanne, thank you also for what you said. That there can be mediation if necessary. As parents, you do everything you can, but you can't be with your child, even as a university student, every day of every hour of every day. That wouldn't promote her own individual growth as a human being. So thank you both for, I know I put a lot out there, and thank you for your answers.
I just want to add one more thing. I just thought of an example that maybe might help. Is that actually I work with a student who's very she's autistic, but she's very visible, I think, in her. So she does a lot of stimming, like she flaps her arms, like when we have like workshops and classes, she has to stand up and be on her like tippy toes all the time. She brings this adorable stuffed chicken to the meeting. I'm just gonna say we've never had a conversation about this with any of the students. We didn't do anything. Nobody cares. Nobody even bats an eye at her doing all of these things. And we sort of kind of just, she's just so smart and brilliant and amazing. And so it just kind of is normal for us to have that, you know? So I think that there's a lot of optimism even during these times.
Jin, did you have something you wanted to add there?
No, I just provided some links for our center is running. So we have some secondary student support programs, post-secondary support programs, and elementary student support programs too. So please check on the website and please contact us if you have any questions and interest about our programs. We'll provide you the information to you. Hopefully your daughter will come to UH Manoa and get connected with our center to get a continuous support here for her graduation and a career transition as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, she's a freshman in high school. You start thinking about college and high school, and it would be a dream for our family if she went to UH. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Park, for putting a lot of the information into the chat already. I think it does answer one of the questions that was asked, which is, are there any active UH STEM programs focused on K to 6 or even pre-K? So you can see all that information in the chat. There is another question, will probably be the last one. And its question is, what are some methods you use to build rapport with students?
I think what
Well, I'll go
Leanne
first.
said. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay. I was gonna say I'll go first. Well, I do something that maybe not everyone can do, right? Which is I'm pretty vocal and very visible about my disability status because, again, that's part of like it's very important for me to have students see that. And so I do tend to attract a lot of students and people and workers that I supervise with disabilities. But I think that the best way to build rapport is really just to be open and vulnerable with yourself. So this is also something that is pretty universal. Like for example, we're doing like PD on like the Ka'au framework, which is really all about well, the way that we're using it is really all about sharing our stories with each other as kind of like the first interaction that we have with students in our classes or in our research programs. And so it really is just talking story with your students, getting to know who they are as people because they're entire holistic people, right? They're not just one or two things or a student in your chemistry class. And I think that's really, and again, I think what I said earlier about being sincere, students know when you're genuinely interested in them, or if you're genuinely really interested in the topic that you're teaching. And I think that goes a really long way with students being able to approach you and building that rapport. I think once you have students, like if you're mentoring students one-on-one on research, right? It's kind of the same thing, right? Is incorporating their feedback, for example, taking what they say to be really valuable and important is also really important, I think. And the last thing I would say is also for students, especially with disabilities or any other kind of issues in their past, is to be consistent and honest, which is, so if you say you're going to do something for students by a certain time, you have to do something for that student by that time, because if you miss that, I know that's really difficult. We're all very busy, but if you know, if you show yourself to be someone who's really unreliable, even if it's not your own fault, right, then students are not going to come back and ask you for help or be open to sharing those parts of themselves. And so, yeah, go ahead, Philip.
No notes on that. I think you're spot on. being personable and building trust, the most important part.
Well, I think that's a nice note to end on. So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you again to our speakers, Leanne and Philip. I am going to put in the chat a link to our post survey. If everyone who attended could please just take a few minutes. It is obviously voluntary. You don't have to do it. But if you could take a few minutes just to answer the quick survey, we'd much appreciate that. It will help us to see what people are interested in, feedback about the session, how we can always improve. But thank you again for everyone who attended. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
in the next session in March.